And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well. You had a nice weekend, a nice beginning of the week. This week is the week. I'm going to say the week of Europe because tomorrow is Europe Day. So for the occasion, I decided to change a little bit the usual interviews that we do by not bringing a politician, but bring people who are involved in EU activism. So last week, for the interview in French, we had the Young European section in France who came over to tell us about activism in France. From the younger people perspective, and tonight we are continuing this time in English with our guest of tonight, who is Petros Fassoulas, who is the Secretary General of the European Movement International. So he's the Secretary General of this organization since 2015. So what is the European Movement? The European Movement is the biggest pan-European network of, let's say, pro-European organization in Europe, of course. And it works both to, on one hand, inform citizens and about the EU, help them have debates about it, etc., but also to influence, to an extent, the EU itself, the decision maker, MEPs, the Commission, whoever is in control in the EU institution, to try to make the EU more democratic, more inclusive of civil society, etc., etc. So of course we're going to discuss about all this for the next hour. But before we start, as usual, I start by reminding the rules for those of you who will be new with us tonight. So our guest will be with us for about an hour. After that, he's going to enjoy the rest of his evening. But you'll be stuck with me for another half an hour. We're going to do a short debrief. Since it's late, I don't want to do a 2 hours debrief. We're going to do a short debrief to discuss what you thought about the interview, cover additional questions that you may have, and generally speaking, just chat together. As usual, I've prepared my questions, but you have a chat. You can react, you can suggest your questions. It's there for that. I will keep an eye on the chat, and I will relay your questions if they're relevant, if we have time. So you know the drill at this point. As usual, of course, and we were in a channel about the EU. We're with European activists. We're going to talk only about Europe, so don't talk about national politics unless it's very much linked to EU politics. And as always, well, stay civil. Don't spam in the chat. You know the drill. And I think I did, let's say, everything I had to say in the introduction, so I suggest that we start. Good evening, Petros Fassoulas. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, and welcome. So before we start, you heard me do my little introduction, say who you are, and very briefly, what is the European movement. Is there anything you'd like to add before we dive into the interview?
No, you hit the nail on the head.
All right, well, let's start actually a bit with you. So you are right now the Secretary General of the European Movement International. But why, for you, why did you get interested in Europe? What was the spark that got you say, oh, Europe is my thing. I'm going to dedicate myself to this cause?
Well, I think it all started back when I was in high school, and mathematics teacher realized that I wasn't cut out for natural sciences. So one day he showed up at class and he asked me to stay behind and passed me a book about European integration. And he said, I've heard you talk about politics. Maybe you will find this interesting. So this was in northern Greece back in '92, I think, so quite a long time ago. And I think that's how I got the bug. I started reading about it. Then when time came for university, I started doing international politics and European law and European economics. And then for my master's, I specialized more on European issues. And then I moved over to Brussels, as you do, to do a stage. And I started working for the Commission. And I have to admit that this almost turned me into a Eurosceptic. It was quite an experience working in a big bureaucracy in my 20s. So I kind of left that. I went back to the UK, and this is where actually I was confronted with true Euroscepticism, or may I say Europhobia. And it was misinformed, and it was rooted in nationalism and bigotry often. And that's what kind of drove me towards the European movement. One day I Googled pro-European organizations, desperate, frustrated with what I was hearing and what I was experiencing, especially because I was working in Westminster at the time. And the European movement popped up. At that point, I think it was 2007. There were not that many pro-European organizations in the UK, which probably explains why we ended up where we are. It was only the European movement, and at the time it was quite small and underfunded. So I started volunteer just out of desperation with the political climate and the language and the narratives that were popping up from newspapers and everywhere.
And so briefly, when I was looking into your profile, I saw that you worked in Brussels, you worked for the Commission. I saw that you also worked in the European Committee of the Regions. Is that right? So European Committee of the Region is always an institution that has a reputation in Brussels and beyond. Some criticism are made about it and its usefulness. For someone who worked inside the Committee of the Region, how do you see this institution, and are the criticism made about it fair or not? Because I have to say, I mean, Committee of the Region is often criticized. Even myself, I make fun of it. So from someone who, perspective of someone who worked in it, how do you see the institution?
No, I think the intentions behind the creation of the Committee of the Regions were noble. And actually, the idea of bringing the local level closer to the European is quite a good one. Not least because often people's first encounter with democracy is at the local level. They're more likely to know their mayor than they are to know their MP or their MEP. So I think it is important to build an institution that actually creates a bridge between the local and the European level. Look, we haven't done it well enough, and often I think the inefficiency of an institution has to do with the fact that it doesn't have any real power. It's a bit like having a car without an engine, without a real role into the process. So that's why it's not able to deliver in its full potential. We need to see how, whether it's through the Committee of the Regions or any other way, make the role of local government much more integrated into the European decision-making process. And then I think people will understand the value of actors like the Committee of the Regions. But it's full of very talented and committed individuals. It's quite political place, and it really brings interesting perspectives on European debates from a local level.
So you said it. You worked in the UK. You became then the president of the European movement in the UK. The UK was a very particular environment for pro-European people, as you said. So especially since you left the UK just before the referendum, you left in 2015. How was it to work in the UK as a pro-European activist there?
Well, as I said at the beginning, it was quite eye-opening. When we are in Brussels, when we are in any political context, often our arguments are not challenged enough. By and large, people agree. There might be disagreements about how we deliver more Europe, but everybody says that we should have more Europe. But I think when you find yourself in such an antagonistic, polemic, even anti-European environment, you are forced to challenge a little bit your own beliefs and hone your arguments and really try to find out what it is that you want to convey and how you need to frame that message to persuade people that are not persuaded already. So I think that in itself was quite an eye-opener. It has informed very much my ideological and intellectual belief in the European project. It isn't just because it's a comfortable feeling that I share with my peers. It's born by the challenge that I faced in the UK when people, well-meaning people, true Eurosceptics, but also those that are ideologically Europhobic, challenge my own beliefs. And that really helped me understand exactly why I stand for what I stand and what are the values that really underpin the project. The other thing that was really shocking, and I'll keep that quite short, is the degree to which a country that is actually very open, very cosmopolitan, very welcoming, very creative, could be hijacked and, in effect, led into a decision that was against its own interest. And of course, we can spend hours talking about this, and we shouldn't just make the conversation about Britain. But that in itself was quite a shocker, because the decision to leave the EU is contrary to everything that British values and the British people stand for. As I said, they are very creative, open, welcoming, multinational, international in their thinking people. And leaving the EU is the exact opposite of those values that Britain stands for. And I really hope that they will be coming back, and the European movement in the UK, who has actually grown tremendously since the referendum, is working towards that end.
I have a first question in the chat, since you mentioned a bit Euroscepticism. Question is, do you think that, since we're talking about that, there is a space for, let's say, a constructive Eurocriticism that can benefit the EU without, let's say, being labeled as anti-EU?
Absolutely. I mean, the EU is an institution, is an international organization, is unique and quite special as a result, but it's not perfect. And I think, we are not in a religious space. This is not dogma. It's not faith. It's just a well-meaning effort to see whether we can take care of our common interests and address the challenges we all face collectively. Of course, it doesn't always work. Of course, there are conflicting visions on how we should do things. Even within the European movement, which is a very broad church, we have different visions of how the European project should move forward, from those that are really convinced integrationists to those that are more intergovernmentalist. And they think, the European Union should be a collective on sovereign nations. So I think, skepticism is healthy in all societies, in all democracies. You need debate and arguments, and those arguments that are better rooted in reality, and those arguments that are based on facts and are able to persuade should be the ones that win. It shouldn't be dogma.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about the European movement in general, so actually the European movement is an organization that even predates the EU. It was created even before the creation of the EU. So maybe can you tell us a bit about the story of the European movement, how it came to be, and why actually it was created before the EU, or what we now call the EU, came to be?
Well, actually, we are at the moment celebrating our 75th birthday. So it was in May the 7th to May the 11th, 1948. So
Happy
really
birthday.
At this very moment that we're having this conversation, that a collection of initiatives that were bubbling around Europe after the end of the Second World War kind of got together at The Hague under the chairmanship of, ironically, Winston Churchill, and bringing together also politicians from France like Mitterrand and Monnet and Adenauer and Spinelli, of course, and Poincaré. But also there were hundreds of other individuals from academia, religious leaders, trade unionists, business people, and ordinary citizens, about 1,000 of them, gathered at The Hague to spend 3-4 days crafting ways to ensure that Europeans would not kill each other at an industrial scales on the battlefield. So, after that process, they decided to create the European movement as a vehicle to advocate for that kind of a vision of a united Europe. And then it was Duncan Sants, the stepson of Winston Churchill, that was given the job to go around Europe and set up offices, outposts of the European movement in key capitals throughout the continent. And in fact, it was the European movement that campaigned and worked towards the creation of the Council of Europe and subsequently the College of Europe. So in a way, those three actors, the Council of Europe, the College of Europe, and the European movement, we are all born out of the Congress of The Hague in 1948. So it's a pity that we are not together. I would be buying you a drink just to celebrate our birthday.
And happy birthday again. And today, so now we're 75 years later. Today, how big is the European movement? How many people are part? How many organizations are part of the European movement?
Yeah, we are currently present in about 30 countries. So we have offices in most European nations, because again, our remit is the Council of Europe. This is our connection, and we represent thousands of activists at the local, regional, and national level who work daily to promote European integration. We have offices in most capitals in our continent, but we also have a presence at the local level. But apart from an umbrella organizations with a local and national presence, we are also a platform of stakeholders. So similar to the vision, to the initiative in 1948 that brought together individuals and stakeholders from all walks of life and across society, the European movement today is exactly the only platform, I think, that congregates both political parties and trade unionists, both employers and environmentalists, and youth organizations and local government. And our objective is to make sure that all those different stakeholders remain in favor of the ideas that the European Union represents, even if they're critical about, minimum wage or carbon capture or the role of local authorities in decision making. Everybody has their own interest. The idea is to keep them all together because, and I'll finish with this, the EU or the European project isn't just an alliance of nations. It's really a consensus built across society. And if we lose one side of society, if businesses tomorrow say that the EU doesn't work for us, or trade unionists say that, this is not for us really, then the future of the EU will be in grave danger. So our job is to make sure that all those different stakeholders come together, all those different actors have a stake in European integration and put forward really ambitious ideas and proposals, just like it was done in 1948, when nobody thought that Europe could be united after decades, if not centuries, of mass conflict. We're also trying to put forward these ambitious ideas to make sure that the Europe of the next 75 years will be strong and prosperous.
Last week, when I had on the on interview the French young Europeans, so let's say the young version of the young wing of the European movement, we talked about federalism, and they told me, yeah, we are in the young European, we are federalist. That's the idea that we defend. You said already that actually in the European movement as a whole, there are actually various views within the movement. Some are maybe more integrationist, others are more intergovernmental. So, what is, let's say, the stance, let's say, the general stance on federalism within the European movement? Because usually you would think, European movement, those are the federalist people, let's say.
Yeah, no, as I said, our position is a bit more nuanced. We think the objective of European integration is to achieve the best results possible for our fellow citizens. And that usually happens at the local level, or it can happen at the national level, it can happen at the European level. And actually, the true expression of federalism is exactly that. How can you make decisions at the most appropriate level? It isn't all just about doing things at the European level. Some of the big challenges we face today, like the environment and climate change, security, whether it's food security, energy security, water security, or the traditional type of security that we're seeing assaulted by Russia at the moment. These are some things that can only be dealt if we do them together at the European level. But there are other things that can be done better at the national level, and some things that can even be done better at the local level. So I think it's really important to see how we identify which are the areas that, by working together, we can deliver even better results than we would if we were doing it alone. I mean, that's the fundamental premise of the European movement. We're pragmatists, we're ideologically committed to this idea, but because exactly we represent such a diverse network of organizations and we want to be a broad church, we try to find the best solutions at the most appropriate level. Don't get me wrong, I do believe that more Europe is better for everyone. But I also understand that in some areas, maybe we can do things better at a different level. We should be open-minded about these things.
Yeah, so you are the Secretary General, but actually there's a board of the European movement. Your current president is an MEP, Eva Meidel. She's from the EPP. I saw that in the rest, another board member was Brendo Benifei, a socialist. So there are different political parties actually that are represented there, and I mean, even if they tend to be from the pro-European family, so let's say from the EPP to the Greens, that means there's also a variety of views. Do you have anyone like from GUE, the left in the European movement, or?
No, we work closely with them, or especially during the Conference on the Future of Europe. We did collaborate a lot. They're not formally a member, but there have been discussions for a while. Again, we should not also underestimate the fact that there are political forces who are in favor of Europe, but they're critical about the way that Europe is run at the moment. So we're very open to working with these people, even if they're critical. Those that are harder to work with are those that are dogmatic, those that are they're view of the world is rooted in nationalism and authoritarianism. These are the people we find a bit difficult to work with. But other than that, we are very open to all political parties. And as I said, we are always discussing also with colleagues in the left about the possibility of perhaps one day bringing them into the organization.
Mm-hmm. And so we already discussed a bit the idea that you can be critical of the EU while still being in favor of it. So how do you balance the possible criticism that you might have of the EU as an organization that is that are activists about in favor of European integration?
I think as long as we're constructive and as long as our intention is to improve the European Union, there's no contradiction in being pro-European and at the same time wanting more. Our criticism is born out of a desire to improve the project that we believe in. Our input is constructive, it's creative, it's ambitious in many ways. We want more. We want a stronger Europe with more tools to be able to address the challenges we are facing. So I think this is very much at the core of what the European Union, the European movement is. Back in 1948, those people gathered at The Hague because they were not happy with the situation in Europe. They didn't hate the Netherlands or Germany or France or even the UK. It was not like they disliked their country. They loved their country. They wanted a better future for the country. Mm-hmm. And they generally believed that by work together, they could achieve that future. It's the same for us. Those 75 years later, we enjoy the benefits of their work. We're committed to the project, but we want more. We want to improve it. And that's what we're working on. That's a lot of ideas. And one last thing, when we come up with our advocacy actions and our campaigns and our communications, these are not just things that I come up with. This is a collective work of all these very diverse stakeholders. On our board, yes, we have people from left and right and from the Greens, but we also have employers and environmentalists sitting together. We have Southern Europeans and Northern Europeans. We have young and old. So, this is the whole idea of Europe. How do we find consensus to be able to resolve our differences without conflict?
Mm-hmm. And so what is... since we could criticize the EU without being opposed to the idea of a European integration, what are, let's say, the biggest frustration, let's say, of the European movement? If we talk about that organization level, what are the main frustration with the EU as it currently exists for the European movement?
Well, I think there is, what I'm going to say is not necessarily the fault of the European Union. The European Union isn't just a monolithic thing. It is the sum of 27 independent nation states who obviously are committed members of the European Union, some more than others perhaps, but they have very conflicting often visions of what the European Union should be. And because of that need to have all 27 aligned, sometimes we go for the lowest common denominator. And as a result, the decisions that are taken are not necessarily the best ones. So our main, perhaps, criticism is the way that the European Union takes decisions. We are still operating using a manual that was put together 20 years ago. The world has changed dramatically since the Lisbon Treaty. So we think it's time that we revisit a little bit that manual. We reconsider the rules under which this organization is governed, the way that it takes its decision, to make sure that they're appropriate for today's world. And of course, we can go into more detail, but we do believe that we need to confer more powers, more competencies to the European level. We need to make the institutions more independent, more able to take decisions on behalf of the whole of Europe, not just taking the interest of certain member states over others. And we need to also make sure that all those new powers, new competencies are deeply rooted in democratic accountability. At the local, national, and European level, we do believe that there is a role for a strong European Parliament, but there's also a role for strong national parliaments and local government. And the more we engage all those different levels, the closer we're going to get to the citizens, the more legitimate the power we confer to the EU institutions will be, and the better the results.
And so we talked a bit about the main ideas, etc. But in terms of activities, what is the output of the European movement? What do you do, like to since one of your mission is informing citizens, another mission is influencing the institution. Concretely, what do you do as a European movement?
Yeah. Well, we have three fundamental pillars of operation. First and foremost, like you said, we inform our fellow citizens. We try to make sure that their understanding of Europe and what the European Union does is rooted on facts and reality. Then we try to involve as many stakeholders in this thing that we call the European project. So, we do a lot of stakeholder management, we engage with them, we organize events and public activities. And then, of course, we try to also influence the direction that the European Union takes by putting forward really ambitious ideas, but put together, drawing from the experience of our member organizations and of our activists throughout Europe, being pragmatic, being realistic, but at the same time, really being ambitious about what we want to do. And of course, the last thing we do is we campaign. We are a campaigning organization. We were set up to campaign for European integration and united Europe. So we do that day in, day out, throughout Europe, here in Brussels, in person, on social media, through engaging with people like yourself. We really make sure that our message is communicated as far and as wide as possible.
And so I mean, it may be a bit difficult for yourself to say, but how influential would you say the European movement is when we're talking about influencing policymakers? I mean, do you get a call of von der Leyen telling you, okay, tell me what I'm supposed to do on this topic, or how efficient you would say you are?
Influence is difficult to measure. We have a pedigree, we have a reputation that certainly opens doors. There is an appreciation of what the European movement stands, and we have built our reputation as a trustworthy, objective, constructive partner in decision-making, both vis-à-vis the European Parliament, the European Commission, but also a lot of the capitals where we are present with our offices over there. So yes, there is I think an open channel of communication with policymakers. And perhaps I can also advertise the European Union a bit, because I've worked at the national level, I've worked in national politics in a couple of countries, and I've worked at the European level as well. And I think the openness with which the European institutions engage with civil society, sectoral interests, lobbyists, well-meaning lobbyists, it's really much more transparent and efficient and effective than at the national level, where access to policymakers is much more complicated and often intentionally restricted. So yes, the European movement is deeply embedded in the discussions about the future of Europe. Yes, we enjoy access and we try to use that access in a constructive, trustworthy manner. But at the same time, the European Union also is the kind of organization that seeks input from outside. They don't always follow our suggestions, and different leaders are more pro-European or more European-minded than others. But I think by and large, there is an openness at the European level to engage with those that want to constructively work towards a better Europe.
And to go back a bit, like on the activist part, as an organization that goes out to meet citizens, to inform them about the EU, to try to interest them, to get them to push for more integration. How is it difficult as a new activist to deal with when there are EU scandals like Qatargate, for instance, which doesn't exactly give a good image of the EU? How as an activist you deal with it and explain to say, okay, there's an issue, but it's still a good project?
Yeah, no, this is unfortunately detrimental. And as soon as the scandal erupted, and as you know, I'm Greek myself, so it has affected very much also Greek politics as much as European politics. I did say that this can have enormous reputational consequences, not just for a certain political party or a certain institution, but the EU as a whole. because often people don't distinguish between the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers and the EPP and the S&D. Most people don't even know what those acronyms feel. And to be honest, even I get frustrated with the use of those acronyms. What they see is the European flag, on articles, on social media posts, they see the European flag next to the world scandal. So that has an effect across the board. Now, the thing is that, unfortunately, corruption is a problem that exists everywhere. It exists at the local politics, it exists at national politics, and unfortunately, the European domain could never be immune to it. This kind of thing gives us an extra reason to make sure that this project that we believe in, it's better. It's better than it currently is. And at the end of the day, the European Union and the institutions that make up the European Union are only an expression of an idea of certain values. So it's not so much the institutions or even the individuals that we are defending, it's the idea we are defending. And we're going to be the first ones to also criticize those that play fast and rules with the rules, those who are corrupt, those who are intransparent, those who damage the flag and the values that that flag represents. And we are indeed not going to tolerate anything like this.
Since you're talking about flag, in France, so I'm French, in France these days there are polemics around the European flag, what it represents, etc., etc. Some are arguing very recently that the European flag actually represents for some French people negative things like liberalism, austerity, this sort of thing. How do you approach people who have a negative initial vision of what the EU represents as a whole, like beyond just the scandal, etc., but they identify the EU, they associate the EU with negative things for what they believe, their own values, etc.
Well, again, I think it has to do with what you want out of the EU. The same way that what people might want out of the National Assembly in Paris, or Westminster in London, or the Voulier in Athens. These institutions don't exist in a vacuum. These institutions are us. And if we want to change them, we need to get involved. We need to be active. We need to be part of the decisions that affect us. So I tell people, you don't like what Europe represents at the moment? Well, I'll tell you what I believe Europe should represent, and you can tell me whether you agree on this or not. And if you do agree on this, then we can work together to ensure that your concerns are echoed. As I said, I will always be diametrically opposed to those that advocate nationalism and jingoism and bigotry. They are wrong, frankly, and history has shown how wrong they are. Now, whether you are on the left side of the political spectrum or the right side of the political spectrum, or you are a green or a lefty or anything else, or a center liberal, that doesn't matter. We can find the common ground, and we can really make sure that Europe has something for everyone, and Europe does have something for everyone. Again, what converted the Brits back in the 80s, in the late 70s and the early 80s, was that vision of a social Europe. The ideas that Delors advocated, together with the single market, the idea of a social Europe that really brought together both those that believed in liberalism and capitalism and those that believe in social dimension, a strong social dimension with a strong social net. This is exactly the whole idea behind the European project, the ability to unite different sides of the political spectrum. And if we veer one way or the other, yes, we run the chance of losing big segments of the electorate. And that's a mistake. I think there is something there in the idea that everybody can reflect and engage with. And in our campaigns, in our conversations, we try to make sure that we convey that. We also frame the discussion in a way that is applicable to people's lives. We don't necessarily always mention Europe. We mention the issues. And we say that Europe can be a solution to the issue that you care about, and it can deliver for you and your family. You don't need to be ideologically committed to it the way I am. You just need to see it as an avenue to make your life better.
Another thing that comes, a criticism that is made against the EU, and that is an actual issue, is the question of the so-called democratic deficit of the EU. So the lack of the lack of democratic legitimacy of the EU institution and their perception by citizens. How would the European movement see a way out of this democratic deficit? And then also before that, how bad do you assess this democratic deficit?
Well, first, I think there is a democratic deficit again across the board. There is a disengagement between the electorate and the elected. We see that in many ways, both in the low turnout that we experience at elections, local, national, and European, but also in the disempowerment and disfranchisement that a lot of citizens feel. We've been running opinion polls since 2018, and among other things, we are measuring people's consistent support for democracy. And we see that consistent support has been dropping considerably. It was already quite low when we started measuring in 2018, and we have seen it reducing to the extent that in some countries is below 15%, 15. And there are reasons for that. As I said, people feel disempowered. My voice doesn't count. My elected representatives don't listen to me. They feel also disadvantaged. My prospects for the future are worsening. My economic situation is not improving. So I think there is a real risk there. That is not just at the European level, it's all the way down to the local level. Now, how do we address that? How do we strengthen our democracy? First of all, we need to make sure that the only democratic experience people have is not just the ballot box. Because if your only experience is voting, and you cannot see a direct link between casting your vote and the decisions that are being made, of course you're going to start thinking that elections are not good and democracy isn't worth it. So we need to complement this representative democracy that we have with other elements, a bit like the deliberative participatory democracy that the European Union, as well as a lot of member states, have been experimenting with over the last few years. It started in Ireland, we've seen it in France with varied degrees of success, and we also saw it at the European level with the Conference of the Future of Europe, and now with the citizen panels. And I do believe that complementing representative democracy with this participatory deliberative democracy can go a long way to get buy-in from citizens, make them feel genuinely involved in decisions that affect them, understand better how the laws that are there to defend their rights and their freedoms are made, and make sure that they feel a little bit more European in the process too. I'll finish with one example. During the Conference of the Future of Europe, it was a 12-month-long process that brought together 800 citizens with political actors from the national and European level and civil society like myself. And at the beginning, the vast majority of citizens that were randomly selected were agnostic. Some of them were actually even skeptical towards the EU. All they had seen were, images of people arguing in windowless rooms in Brussels. But as days and weeks and months went by, and as they found themselves involved in the process, that deliberative process, and as they saw their proposals coming to life and eventually becoming the recommendations of that process, the vast majority of them came out and they said, we feel more involved and more European as a result. So I think there is a trick here we shouldn't miss in that idea of deliberative democracy. It's not a silver bullet. It cannot save democracy on its own. But I think it's something that it's an innovation we need to integrate in our democratic system if we are to save it.
Speaking of this balance between deliberative democracy and representative democracy, it's not an easy balance to find because even if you have citizen panels, you tell them, okay, give you ideas, ultimately it's MEPs, it's the representative that are going to make the laws, and they have their own legitimacy. It's not, they can't just copy paste whatever the citizens are drafting. So how do you find this balance? And a bit of a sub question: how do you let's say manage the expectations of citizens? Because Conference on Future of Europe, that was we discussed it a bit on the channel quite a bit in the past. There was an impression that we were somehow overpromising citizens. We're telling you go on this conference and you're going to change the EU. Whatever you want, we're going to do it. And in the end, well, that's not happening because the council and etc. So how do we manage the expectation of citizens to avoid like overpromising and then they have the impression that they worked for nothing?
First of all, it's not the end yet. It's not even the beginning of the end. It's only the end of the beginning, as Winston Churchill said, if I may. So I think we still have to see how many of those recommendations will be taken up, and quite a few are being implemented. So, but I agree with you. We need to be careful not to march people up the hill and then march them down again with nothing to show for it. Managing expectations is very important indeed. But first, I'll tackle perhaps that idea of how do you reconcile representative democracy with this participatory deliberative democracy. And I think it's a question of, again, compromise. Even, MEPs themselves, they have to find compromise with representatives of other political parties. They're all equal, they're all directly elected, but nobody holds sole ownership of the truth. And then they have to go and find compromise with members of the representatives of member states at the Council of Ministers. So in that mix, I think introducing also an element of deliberative democracy isn't in any way undermining the legitimacy and the democratic mandate that members of the European Parliament, as well as members of national parliaments, have. The same way that negotiating with the Council doesn't undermine their legitimacy, I think negotiating with citizens, with even the involvement of civil society, if I may, wouldn't undermine in any way the legitimacy. In fact, it will only strengthen that legitimacy because, as I said at the beginning, they will have buy-in into that process, into those decisions. They will feel involved and engaged. So as a result, they will feel ownership of that decision, and that will make the authority of the European Parliament, of the Council of Ministers, of the EU as a whole, much, much stronger. But I'll circle back again to your point about expectations. Yes, it is important to get the methodology right, to put in place a system that enables their constructive engagement without overpromising. And it has been done. As I said, it has been done in Ireland numerous times at this time. It has been done in Canada, it has been done at the local level across Europe, but also in the US. So I think there are various models you can employ. At the moment, in typical European fashion, we're trying to drive the car as we're building. We put in motion that conference, the gigantic conference of the future of Europe, the brainchild of Macron that then won the line and ran with, and we hadn't even agreed who the members of that conference were going to be, and we were actually organizing meetings of the conference. So yes, sometimes, we gotta take a step back, build the process, put in place a methodology, ensure that we get it right, and then embark into that great voyage. And if we do it that way, we will be successful.
And speaking of legitimacy and involvement of citizens, next year it's the European elections, 2024. There's, of course, it's going to be the moment for citizens at the moment to express themselves and potentially definitely have an influence on what's going on at EU level. But there's a lot of debates around the format of EU election, etc. So, in your view, in the views of the European movement, what should be the maybe not the ideal format, but a good format for the EU election to improve this democratic legitimacy? We know that there is debates around the so-called Spitzenkandidat system. We have the debates around the transnational list, etc., etc. So, how is the European movement seeing a potential EU election that would make deliver, let's say, on democratic legitimacy?
Yeah. We need to make the European elections truly European. At the moment, we have a collection of 27 national elections. We have national lists put together by national parties, running on national platforms, debating national issues. We have seen European issues appear more regularly in recent elections, or perhaps we have seen the same challenges affecting a lot of member states. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, as I said, these are by and large national elections. So before we even talk about the Spitzenkandidat and transnational lists and other things, and the European movement, as you can imagine, has a long list of proposals for how to make the European elections more European. We need to also start thinking about how we create a European public sphere. How do we actually generate the kind of, facilitate the kind of discussions that touch on issues that affect all of us. So I think that is something that starts with education. It starts with local and national debates that are European-minded. So, when you talk about environmental pollution, you just don't think about your local river when you actually know that, that river might be coming from across the border. When you talk about security, you realize that, if there is a war next door, it's very possible that it will affect you too. So when we start as politicians or activists, journalists, campaigners, influencers, talking about what people perceive national issues in a European context, we will start building that European public sphere. And then we can also start making our European elections truly European and put together all those ideas. Common manifestos for political parties, common corporate identity for European political parties, common lists for European political parties, common dates for European elections, and yes, electing directly the leadership of the European institutions, making sure that they are truly representative of the whole of the continent, not just a political family or one member state, transforming perhaps even our institutions and the way they work and the way they engage with each other. But I think at the root of this process must be education and this creation of the European public sphere. And then we can also have the European elections through real European elections.
So yeah, if I understand you, well, the idea of starting by, let's say, the election format is, I don't want to say pointless, but it's not going at the roots of the issue, which is the lack of an EU public sphere. We don't have media that are talking about the EU in a regular way, explaining the interest. So we should reverse the process, is what you're saying.
Certainly, I don't want to discount the work that a lot of people are doing to improve things from the European level. I just think we have a better chance of success if at the same time we also invest in all those different things. And again, don't get me wrong, just because we are here in Brussels, we shouldn't ignore what actually does happen at the national level. You do have a lot of people that are trying to build that public sphere. Again, yourself included, the interviews you do in French, in English, with people at the national level as well as the European level, that work that you do is crucial in creating a European public sphere. You engaging people in conversation about European issues, bringing your experience, your understanding. So things are already happening. They're taking shape. You see newspapers referring to issues. You see bloggers and influencers and vloggers talking about those things, really creating a European conscience. You see people going on Erasmus or going on holidays or really engaging with each other through music and culture in a more European way. I'm not. I haven't reached yet the point in my life where I think everything is bad. I do think there is a lot of hope here and a lot of really good initiatives and individuals as well as organizations that are working on this. We just need to focus more on that than spend all our time talking about transnational lists and top candidates and what happens in Brussels. I think there's a lot of good things happening at the national level as well as the European level, and we need to join them up.
Even if there's a lot of things happening at national level, there, like you said, there's a few EU level thing that you need to give a structure that makes sense. And we've been talking now. It's talking about that for years, about the potential reform of the treaty to modernize a bit, to adapt a bit the format of the EU to the new realities, the number of member states, the difficulties regarding vetoes in some areas, etc. But member states don't necessarily agree on the idea of a treaty and treaty change, and also what to put in this treaty change. So now there's been talk about linking any enlargement of the EU to Ukraine, to Moldavia, to potentially Georgia in the future, to before let's say having the EU sorting out this issue with the treaty, but treaty changes. But are you optimistic about the chances of such a treaty change to occur in the next 5 years, let's say, or do you think that at the moment it's the differences between member states are too broad to realistically expect anything going on there?
Yeah. I'm an optimist by default. Having said that, of course, I've spent the past 12 months, I spent the past 12 years, but certainly the last 12 months engaging closely with most member state permanent representations here in Brussels, as well as commission officials and MEPs, of course. And especially, I think the appetite isn't there among most member states to move forward with the kind of reforms that are necessary, the kind of reforms that you mentioned, to be able to make our union stronger. There is a lot of resistance for a variety of reasons. Even those that are in favor of reforming the treaties are saying that it's not the right time. You know, we have a war, we just came out of a pandemic, there is an economic crisis. That's not the time to play with the toolbox. And then you have others who are actually have a different vision, a completely different interpretation of what that reform should be. You know, they would like a more illiberal, undemocratic, authoritarian even kind of European Union. So there are some forces even within the European Union that have a different understanding of the concept of reform of the treaties. So that makes it really complicated at the moment. And there is a certain absence of strong leadership, or at least an idea. You know, all the revolutionary steps forward in European integration were not so much constitutional, they were pragmatic. You know, the creation of the single market was a result of economic stagnation. You know, it wasn't presented as a need for closer European integration. It was a solution to a specific problem. The same thing with the common currency. It was a way to anchor a strong German economy after reunification. It was a way to anchor that within the European context. The same thing with enlargement. Bring people in after the collapse of the Soviet Union to ensure that, you know, democracy, the rule of law, peace even was defended and strengthened in that part of Europe. So I think the same thing will happen, but it will be born out of the need to address a specific crisis. And the awful scenes in Ukraine and everything that has happened around it, I think has focused the minds of a lot of people that, like you said, if we want to make our union bigger, we need to change the rules of the game, the rules of engagement at the European level. And if we want to safeguard the European Union, we also need to take some really bold decisions. So I think this is there. What we need now is that spark, whether it happens through leadership or through crisis. We need that spark that will really bring forth. And that idea, that vehicle, the way that the single market was a vehicle for cross integration, the common currency was a vehicle for cross integration, and enlargement was a vehicle for cross integration. We need that excuse now. And you know, I think we should be working towards finding that excuse, not just focusing on treaty articles to change, but finding that excuse and that big idea that will help us deliver the change that we need.
Speaking of Ukraine, since the European movement is present beyond just the member state in EU, is there a European movement in Ukraine?
Not at the moment. We are actually working with a variety of civil society organizations as we speak, with the support of the European Commission in Ukraine, to create a platform, a European movement platform. You know, the European movement is an end to itself. We are in a country because we think there is value for it. So, and we want to make sure that the stakeholders there also have the same feeling. So yes, we're working with various civil society and other stakeholders to establish whether there is appetite, and there is indeed appetite, and whether we can offer value by creating the European movement. And people tell us that yes, there is that value. So we're now collaborating with several of them to hopefully build the European movement there as a vehicle, as a campaigning tool for closer integration between Ukraine and the EU.
Tomorrow is Europe Day. Next year is the European election, so it's going to be a busy year for the European movement in general. What kind of activity do you organize, let's say, for tomorrow, for Europe Day? What is, let's say, the typical kind of thing that the European movement organize themselves or support when it comes to bring Europe, let's say, to citizens?
We try to be as broad as possible. We don't want to be just talking to our committed activists, but on Europe Day, we do get a little bit excited, I must admit. So, there is a lot of things happening to celebrate, what the idea of Europe stands for, those values of solidarity and of equity, of peace and democracy, freedom and liberty. So, there are a lot of activities taking place at the local level, in French villages, in Finnish towns, around the continent, as well as, of course, some things that we're doing at the European level, online and in person. And for us, Europe Day isn't just the 9th of May. We start off weeks in advance and we continue for weeks after. It's an opportunity to talk about those values, really, as well as celebrate the idea of Europe. And we try to make the most of it, as with traditional events, online campaigns, street parties, all sorts of things. You get in touch with us and we'll tell us where you are and we'll find a party for you.
Well, you chat, you heard that. Look at free your agenda for tomorrow and reach out to European movement. We are reaching the end of the hour. Like I promised, I don't want to take more of your time. A final question, actually, two final questions. First, we talked about changing the treaties, making the EU evolve. Let's say that you don't have to worry about member states. You snap your finger, you change the EU. What do you change and why?
I wish I had that power. I feel like Thanos now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What do I change first? Well, I would start by teaching European history, really European history at schools. Alongside national history. Everybody's national history is important, but I will start by teaching European history, and I will also start by making civic studies compulsory. People should know what the parliament is and how it works. So they should know what their history is and the role that Europe has played in that history, both now, but also millennia ago. Europe isn't just the European Parliament building or the European Commission president. Europe is Shakespeare and Plato and, the Juventus football team. All of those things are Europe. And we need to make sure that this red thread connects us today with our common past. So history, civic education, and then teaching values, because that's not going to pay dividends just at the European level. It's going to pay dividends in every day. Teaching solidarity, empathy, teaching the idea of togetherness, of cooperation. I think if we are to teach those things at an early age, people will be much more open-minded and much more perceptive to the idea of Europe. And I think our societies will be better also as a result. So I think education is the silver bullet on every possible level, including when it comes to European integration. So if I could, that's exactly what I would.
Well, thank you very much. Before I let you go and we start the debriefing, if people have to remember one message from you from tonight, what would be your message?
Standing together is much better than being alone.
That works for me. So chat, make sure to thank Petros Fassoulas for his time. Petros, thanks again for taking the time to answer at this late hour our questions about EU activism. I hope you enjoyed the experience. Well, I wish you a good evening. Chat, stay with me. We're going to do the debriefing. Petros, I wish you a good evening and see you another time.
Thank you very much for having me. Also, thank you also for staying up and being such an engaging conversation partner. And enjoy the rest of the discussion. And happy Europe Day.
Thank you. Bye bye. All right, chat. Let's start the debriefing together. Up. I'm putting away Zoom. In the meantime, tell me your impressions and your potential questions. As usual, I have my little notebook where I took notes of stuff. So, interesting interview. Something I didn't know about the European movement, especially since, I mean, it's a bit odd since I mentioned last week I interviewed in French the young Europeans in France, the young European wing of the European movement. And they told me, oh yes, we're federalists, etc. And when talking to Petros, it's like, yeah, well, some are more federalists, although are less federalists. So it's interesting to see that the young Europeans are much more federalist than maybe the main, let's say, organization itself. That I didn't know. But yeah, we started a bit by discussing. I think it's something that is interesting. I mean, it's a bit of an evolution of the question that I usually ask with the to MEPs is what made you European? What made you care about politics? So he said, oh yeah, for me it was this teacher who gave me a book about Europe, and I got interested, etc. into it. So yeah, I'm always interested. Like, of course you know about the EU. I hope you're a bit interested in the EU, at least more than before coming on the stream. But on your side, like, I'm curious at what's like the thing that got you interested in European politics in general. I'm not asking you like to then having let's say an epiphany and then suddenly wanting to work in the commission, but like what made you, let's say, interested in it. In the meantime, I'm drinking. Young people in general seems to be more pro-EU from what you've seen. Pro-EU, I don't know. I mean, if we're talking generalities, young people tend to be more radical. If radical is not the right way to say it, but more straightforward in the opinion, in one way or another. So, in that sense, yeah, if you have a pro-European person, if it's a young person, he's more likely to be very much pro-European, so federalist. And on the other side, if they are not very pro-European, they're more likely to be very much against the EU. So it's a bit like the excitement of youth, let's say. Oh, sorry, I put water everywhere. It's a mess on my chair. Pleasantly surprised, you're quite pragmatic and realistic. You prefer if your the MEPs were more like this as well. I didn't feel like it was like at least more realistic and pragmatic than most MEPs. I mean, to be fair, MEPs are politicians, so you know they have like an idea, they have to stand by this idea, etc. So makes sense that they have to be clear on what they stand for. But I didn't have the impression that it was much more pragmatic and realistic than other. Although to be fair, when you are talking about MEPs are always in the tough, like well, not necessarily the tough, but in the confrontation of ideas. So they have to stand firm on what they stand, and they're talking to other people who have very firm position. While when you are an activist, association like the European movement, etc., you go outside the normal bubble. You go talk to people who don't necessarily have an idea. So you have to be, let's say, flexible enough to adapt yourself to what you're dealing with, and so yeah, probably that leads to be more pragmatic and not very much dogmatic or having like a very hardcore stance, apart from the very basic level when it comes to values. But but it was. I think it's also a matter of what they do, the nature of what they do. You got to vote for the first time as an adult back in 2003 for join the EU. You kept up the interest since then. Okay, well, that's fair. That's fair. If your first vote was about the EU, makes sense. To the extent, for me, it's not exactly the same story, but let's say one of my first moments when I became like not politically involved, but much interested in political issues was about EU politics. Like it was in 2005 when there was the referendum on the so-called constitutional treaty, which failed. I was too young to vote, but still, I got interested in the debate at school. They were organizing debate in that, and that got me a bit interested into it, and then I kept on. What else did I have? Shit, I forgot to ask him about it. Like when he said, "Oh yeah, the commission." I worked in the commission in Brussels, and he almost turned me into a Eurosceptic. I made a note of it to ask him about it, but I forgot. So too bad. That would have been interesting to see what made him more critical. Although, like he said, it was like working in a big bureaucracy. To an extent, I can relate to that because. Like I said, like I usually describe myself as an ex-federalist, a recovering federalist, and because like when I arrived in Brussels, I was maybe not hardcore federalist, but I was more on the side of federalist. And then when I started working in Brussels, in the parliament, etc., my views evolved a little bit. I'm still very much pro-European, very much in favor of European integration, but like. I have my doubts about the format, the model of federalism. Although, of course, there's plenty of the different variation of federalism, etc. But the being confronted to the institutional reality of the EU, and also you get to dig more into the substance of it. That let's say made me polish a bit my views, my initial views. What else did we talk about? I don't want to make it too long because it's late. If there's a topic that you want me to talk particularly, do mention it. I'll give you priority, but otherwise I have my list. It was interesting when he said, following Andrew's questions about like, it's possible to have constructive criticism about the EU without being considered like as a staunch Eurosceptic, and he said something that's pretty much aligned with things that I usually say on the topic. He said, the EU. I mean, it would be something I could almost say word for word, which is like the EU is a human creation. It's not divine. It's not God given. So by definition, it's imperfect, and you can debate about it. You can improve it. You can deteriorate it as well. So. The fact that you can be pro-European and be critical about it, and still I have a valid criticism that make the EU progress, because the EU is imperfect, and it's a matter of how do you get make the EU better, let's say. And indeed, like sometimes you need to be critical of the EU to make it go forward. Then that's something he said. I also agree with. He said, criticism needs to be fact-based. If you're doing like pure dogmatism or you're inventing facts, then that's not useful criticism at all. It becomes populism, etc. But if you have a fact-based, something that is true in terms of criticism, as far as you can say true, there you can create a useful debate, and then you could potentially improve things or not. And then it's also a matter of political debate. What you see as a thing that doesn't work well, other people can, on the contrary, see it as something positive. Again, you link back to the issue of let's say integration, more pro-integration, versus a more subsidized, not subsidized, but EU with more subsidiarity. So, and also then the political difference of opinion on the substance. That's normal, but you can be pro-EU, and you should be critical of the EU even if you are pro-EU, because otherwise, that becomes dogmatic. And just like you have to refuse dogmatism from one side, you have to refuse it also from the other. That's otherwise it's not exactly fair. Where did we discuss? On the institution, the world has changed since 2009, so since the Lisbon Treaty. Don't tell me about it. That link back to the idea of institutional changes, changing the treaties, etc. And more and more we are reaching the point where it's less and less sustainable for the EU to stay as it is without a change. I mean, the EU can function with more or less difficulty, but it can function under the current situation, the current treaty, under the Lisbon Treaty. But more and more, it's getting its back against the wall, and it will have to take a decision. I've said it numerous times. I would say that we are reaching the point where the EU will have to take a side. We have, let's say, harmonized. We have integrated the majority of topics in terms of EU policies. There's competencies, etc. We have QMV, so qualified majority for most topics, etc. But we're reaching a crossing where we have to decide, okay, are we going back to a EU that is more focused on individual countries, so-called intergovernmental EU, so the EU where the center of power is governments and the EU is just there in a secondary manner to complete what member states are doing individually, or you're going towards a more integration and at a very long stage potentially federal EU where you transferring power to the EU and you make the EU a much bigger center of power and you facilitate decision making at EU level, for instance, by removing a number of vetoes, but giving additional competence, etc. And of course, to take that crossing, everyone needs to be on board. And at the moment, that's not the case because you have not only divergence on what kind of changes should be made to the treaty, but even on the basic principle that's what the EU should be. Like you take to take the classic example, you have on one side, let's say, Hungary, Poland, and on the other side, I would say a majority of the EU. But those views are not compatible. I mean, the way Hungary and Poland see Europe and the way, let's say, France and Germany see Europe, just to name a few, or even the Benelux, etc., they are completely different beasts. And as long as we don't have all member states that agree on which direction to go, more intergovernmental, more integration, you're stuck. You're stuck in the middle, and that's not positive. That's not good in the long term. Like Petros said at the end, it's always a matter of finding the right excuse, the crisis that would, let's say, force a member state to take a decision, because otherwise they're happy to just postpone the issue until a later date, because that's a political risk, and governments don't like political risk. They have elections. Everyone has election, at least for now. But yeah, I feel like we're reaching more and more the point where decision will have to be taken on which direction the EU should take. I wonder if you would categorize the rule of law fetish of the EP as dogmatic. No, I don't think so, because rule of law is not. It's a fundamental. It's part of the values. So sure, you have topics on which you can diverge, etc., but then you have the foundation. The core values, peace, democracy, rule of law, those are the basics. If you don't have the basics, then then you're not part of the EU. So I don't think you would consider like the rule of law fetish. I don't think it's a fetish as being dogmatic. It's a building block of the EU. You can't have an EU without the rule of law. That's otherwise you don't call it democracy anymore. That's another vision of the EU, let's say. But I don't think you would classify that as a dogmatic view. What else did we talk about? Democratic deficit. There would be lots to say about that. Democratic deficit. Something that he said that was true is that democratic deficit, so the disconnection between citizens and politics is not a phenomenon that is exclusive to the EU. It's present at all levels of politics. In the EU, there is, let's say, a more visible, or it's more visible than for others, because it's naturally further away from citizens. For some certain countries, it corresponds to logic that are foreign to their political traditions. Like if you take France, the political tradition is completely different than the political traditions from the European Union. So for a French person, EU politics is very confusing because it's a completely different logic than what they're used to. So that creates naturally the disconnection. But like he said, it's a trend that we've seen over the years build up at European level, but also at national and even regional level, etc. This idea of disconnection from politics for various reasons. The fact that citizens may feel that their voice do not count, that they vote but nothing change. The idea, the issue that they feel disconnected. I mentioned it already, but that they feel like they are the losers of how things are working. In the sense, like, take globalization. If you take the rise of populism since the 2010s, it's a combination of degradation of the economy, for instance, in a number of member states, along with the feeling that others are benefiting, and that we become the loser of the game, let's say. And furthermore, you have a question of identity, because there's also, let's say, a difference between the way people perceive themselves and the way they see reality being. Like if we take concrete examples, like in the Brexit, Trump election, etc., a lot of people who voted for Trump, a lot of people who voted for Brexit. In member states, a lot of people that vote for the far right, the far left, etc., are people who feel that they are the losers. Trump, he got elected thanks to for people who work in who live in the part of the US which is called the Rust Belt, which is the former industrial regions of the US, which closed down and got into big economic troubles with disindustrialization, etc., etc. And so they feel like they're being the losers of globalization, that they are being left behind. And that's not acceptable for them. And also, it comes you combine that with the idea of identity. Again, similar trend in the UK, for instance, when it comes to Brexit, where they see themselves as the American dream, with in the UK, the idea of the UK being the strong power. They used to be an empire, etc., etc. And this idea that they're making of what the UK, what being British should be, not corresponding to what they see in reality. They have the perception that power has been taken away from them and decisions that are made against their own interests. And so this leads to the rise of populism, disconnection between citizens and regular politics. So that's something that's a tendency that has been running for a good decade, at the very least, since the 2008 economic crisis, because again, it starts from an economic crisis. Perhaps is that why Germany dominates the EU landscape, even though France is economically larger, or at least militarily? The German, I don't think it's a domination per se, but the reasons why Germany is more in front, more powerful, it's a combination of several factors. There's an economic factor, which can change. If you take the EU in the 90s, the Germany was seen as the sick man of Europe, because economically Germany was not doing well in the 90s, because they had to absorb Eastern Germany, which used to be part of the Soviet bloc, and the economic situation in Eastern Germany was not good, and so it was taking a lot of resources from Germany to let's say bring up to speed Eastern Germany. So economy was not good in in Germany in the 90s, and then they through reforms, etc., 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 they turned things in a change of model. They turned things around, and from the year 2000s, they became an economically more powerful country, one of the dominant player, and Angela Merkel capitalized on this economic re-emergence of Germany. So yes, there is the fact that Germany suddenly became very strong economically, which of course comes with the perks of being more powerful. There's also in the question of the influence in the EU, the way Germany approached the EU in general compared to France, particularly. Where France is very much like a French-centered, like even if it's slowly starting to change, but for historical reasons, etc. For France, it was considered heretical to think that there could be a center of power equivalent or even more powerful than Paris. If you're not in Paris, your politics it's not interesting politically. Power comes from Paris. You cannot be powerful if you're outside of Paris. And so, of course, and everything had to be around national politics, everything had to be around France, etc. So whenever you had elections, in EU elections, etc., you were not sending the elite to Brussels. Basically, when you were building the list of MEPs for the elections, you were sending people who you wanted to send far away from Paris so that they don't become annoying. People who have been useful somewhat, and to thank them, say, okay, here, have a seat in the European Parliament and have fun for 5 years, and that's my thank you gift. And or it was people who lost in national elections. So you say, okay, you lost the national elections, but here's a seat in the European Parliament to keep you warm until the next national election. And so whenever there was a national election, people would run away from the Parliament to try to come back in the national politics. Verhofstadt has always been very much pro-European, so it's not a matter of him, of his, let's say, bilan as a prime minister. So that's the French version. The Germans, on the contrary, have always seen the EU as a vector of influence, because, again, for historical reasons, Germany after World War II cannot be seen as a dominant player. They do not want to be seen as the dominant player because of World War II. So for them, since Germany on its own could not be powerful and let's say be assertive in its power, despite being a big country, etc., the EU was a perfect vehicle because it was a collective body, and that let's say drown down a bit visibility. And so for them, the EU, they say, okay, we're going to send people in the EU to work in there, to influence, so that ultimately the EU will go in the interest of Germany, defend German interest, but we won't be seen as the one imposing the will of the EU. It's a collective thing. We work together with all countries, etc. So even if we're pushing for so that, of course, German interests are defended, it's a collective thing. It's in recent years, Germany is becoming more, let's say, tolerant to being assertive, to defend openly its position. But for a long time, the Germans like to stay behind the scene and to influence. So that meant that they were sending people who were dedicating themselves to EU politics. You were sending MEPs there. They would send bright people. People would stay 10, 15 years in the institution to become expert and then influence things, etc., which is completely different from the French, who every 5 years people were running away. And the other member states, seeing that, were quite happy to be with Germany, because for them it was a way to counterbalance France. France was very much assertive, very much wanted to make the EU a French project, and so they saw Germany as more of a team player. And so by supporting Germany and making Germany, let's say, a bit more dominant de facto in terms of influence, they were counterbalancing the French influence, that were the assertiveness of France, that was seen as maybe more selfish, in the sense that the other country would say, okay, France is going to do what's good for France, but not necessarily what's good for us and for Europe as a whole. So that's why there was also historically a greater emphasis that was given to German influence because they were seen as a safe bet for other countries compared to France, for instance. But things are evolving again. France is becoming less maybe self-centered, or at least a bit more European dimension. Germany is a bit more assertive on its side. So things are evolving, but to simplify, that's a bit the gist of it. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope so. Let's say, do you agree there are Rust Belt in Europe as well? Semiconductor tendency could be observed. Yeah, definitely. I mean, in all countries, it's a trend that you find in all, let's say, Western democracies. That you found it in the UK, you find it in every country. In France, you would find it. Let's say the equivalent of the Rust Belt would be the north of France. So it's the consequence of the deindustrialization. From the 80s, you had at some point large industry that were employing a lot of people, like blue collar people, and as the economy shifted away with globalization, with the rise of new technologies, etc., these areas that were very much industrial, became less relevant. Industry closed down, mine closed down, etc., and suddenly all these people that relied. These blue collars that rely on the industry found themselves without a job, and you find that in every country. That's every country that had a large industrial base had to either rethink themselves completely. Take an example people don't think often. Take Luxembourg. Luxembourg used to be an industrial country, mines, steel factories, etc. So it was very much an industrial country. That's where wealth came from in Luxembourg. With globalization and disindustrialization, of course, Luxembourg got impacted, and so they had to rethink themselves. And so the bet that Luxembourg made, which is a bet that you would find in many very small countries around the world, is okay. We don't have natural resources. We're not big enough to wait by ourselves. So how do we become, let's say, maintain our wealth? Finance. And so Luxembourg started to become a financial center which generated wealth. But initially, they were an industrial country, and they transitioned to a finance-based country because of the change of economic situation. Do I think all the people will lose their jobs to robotics and AI? No. I mean, no. I don't think everyone will lose their jobs and robotics and etc. It will have an impact, definitely, and you can already see it, and that's definitely part of the discussion that we're seeing these years in the EU. But I think it's an exaggeration to think that robotics and AI will replace everyone. It creates worries that are a bit similar to what we saw with in Rust Belt, etc., etc. But the EU member states are very much aware of that, and they're trying to avoid this situation. So I don't think this is going to be the case, or as bad as what it was when there was the wave of disindustrialization, etc., etc. Even if AI is going to have a big impact, but it's we don't know yet. I mean, we're all talking about AI, but the applications of AI are very wide, and everyone is still playing with the potential and the limits of it. All right. Looking at the time, I don't want to stay too long. Okay. What do I tell you about? Elections? Conference on the Future of Europe? Elections. Conference on the Future of Europe. I've ranted about it many times, so probably you already know everything that I would tell you about. Otherwise, we could have the discussion another stream, but it's getting late. I don't want to have other things to do, to be honest, more things to do. So let's continue and finish with the EU election. So next year, 2024, go vote. Important. And so we discussed, okay, how do we make European elections more important, something that is actually contributing against the democratic deficit of the EU, this disconnection between citizens and the EU. And so he said, which was interesting. They say, oh yeah, but the Greek elections are going to be important. That's for sure, notably for the EPP, for the right. But the EU elections are. What was interesting, he said, oh, sure, like the format of the elections, whether there is a lead candidate, whether there are transnational rules, etc. It's important, but if you don't have the EU public sphere, if you don't build, like, let's say, EU literacy, if that makes sense, like for citizens, that citizens know about the EU, they are interested in the EU, and they know, let's say, the stakes of what's going on in European politics, that's a bit pointless because people will not care, which is true, of course, and definitely the difficult part because it's a matter of education, it's a matter of media, the matter of national politics, how national politics are being let's say, articulated with EU politics, etc., etc. Every election is the most important one. Every election is always the most important one ever in the history of ever, because otherwise, like, you don't mobilize people. If you tell people, oh yeah, it's an election, but yeah, you know, nothing much happening. But yeah, come vote. It'd be good. I mean, you still need to elect people, but yeah, not really engaging. You always need to go into a bit of overdrive. Say, oh yeah, if you don't vote, either you're gonna change. If you vote, you're gonna change everything, and if you don't vote, everything will go to shit. So that's a very typical, let's say, mechanism for election to generate attention. But that being said, so yeah, we need more media literacy, more education, etc. But then he said, okay, if we go then into the format, he said, okay, of course we need to have EU officials be directly elected, so not only MEPs, but probably the president of the European Commission, maybe a single president instead of having a president of the Commission, president of the Council, etc., etc. We need like a common identity for member states, for political parties, meaning that sure, you all know, well, you know your political parties in your country. I'm French, I know Les Républicains, I know the Socialist Party, France Insoumise, etc. In Germany, if German people will know the Democrats, they will know the Greens, they will know the SPD, etc., etc. But then you don't relate that to the EU politics. If you ask the average French, he doesn't know what the EPP is. He doesn't know what the SND is, or the Greens. Okay, he will know what the Greens are, but he doesn't know what the GUE are. All these things don't mean anything to them because they have never seen them. They've never been confronted. Whenever there are EU elections, it's the national parties that are putting forward their logos, their ideas, etc., etc. And so he says, yeah, you need to have common corporate identity, meaning that every political party needs to run under the flag of the EPP, the SND, the European political parties, so that everyone in the EU can identify, okay, when I'm voting for the EU election, I'm not voting for the Républicains, I'm not voting for the SPD, I'm not voting for Fidesz, I'm voting for the EPP, for the SND, for the non-attached for now, but maybe ECR later, so that they can associate that to EU politics. Common list that seems to link to transnational list. I'm not convinced about the transnational list, I have to say. So this idea is that there should be in parallel of the national list, so the list that is put forward by the SPD, let's say. So all the German socialists, there would be on the side a separate list that would be pan-European. So this list would have people from Germany, from France, from all around the EU, and be under the flag of the political party, the European political party. So you would have an SPD list, German SPD list, and then you would have a list, European SPD list, European Socialist list. Supposed to make the EU politics more visible. I'm not convinced. I have to say I'm not convinced. I find the system to be more confusing for citizens than anything. Personally, people will be like, "But why are we voting for two different set of lists? Why am I voting for people where why am I voting for Latvian people or French people I've never seen once in my life? It's for me, it doesn't bring that much clarity for the citizen. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Common dates for the elections, indeed, because contrary, not contrary to common belief, but there's actually not a single date for the European elections, because some countries vote at different days. In France and actually quite a few countries, you vote on Sunday. Other countries, you vote on a Thursday. The UK used to vote on a Thursday. Some countries vote on a Saturday, etc., etc. So, because of the different national traditions, well, actually, the European election are actually over 3 or 4 days. And so some people will have voted on Thursday, but you will have the actual results only on Sunday evening when you have all the member states that have voted. So that plays a bit counter the idea of having a single like EU-wide election. And yeah, I think I mean we could talk for hours. Huh? You know me. I barely covered half of the thing. Hey, thank you for the follow, and also thanks Little Miss Dairy for the sub earlier. Election in India last 1 month. Having 1 week in election in the EU is fine. Yeah, I mean to be fair, the scale of is not exactly the same. I would say. Plus, it's I wouldn't necessarily compare exactly the Indian context to the European one, but the scale is a bit different. So the amount of people is a bit different, but yeah. Any final point you want me to cover before I conclude? Last chance. Otherwise, I conclude. I tell you what we're going to do tomorrow and the rest of the week, and I will bid you a good evening. No? All right. So, first, I hope that you enjoyed the interview. As usual, follow the channel. Just like Miss Lily's did. If you have a Prime that is lying around, you can do like Miss Dairy and subscribe. That's very much appreciated and that does help me. Next, hey Namlo, have a good week too. Next up, tomorrow, Europe Day. So of course I'm going to do a stream. Initially I had something else planned, but I had to postpone it to another time. So instead it's gonna be a bit of a ask me anything kind of session, so you can ask me whatever you want about the EU, about me if you want, but mostly the EU, and also to also make it a bit entertaining, I'm going to select some of my favorite EU anecdotes and quotes. So you probably notice in the chat every 10 or 15 minutes or so you get a EU anecdote. So I'm going to select a bunch of anecdotes that I particularly like, whether they are interesting to comment politically or they are funny or completely absurd. I'm going to tell you small stories about the EU, so it's going to be tomorrow at 8, and then there will be on Sunday a news review, but it's going to be in French. And yeah, on this note, I wish you all a good evening, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I'm telling you to follow me, if I don't put my links to Twitter, Discord, all the good thing where I have all the programs and stuff, that's not gonna work. So click on the link and go follow my various social media. There's going to be news about it. I'll tell you about it tomorrow. Nice SpongeBob meme. Yeah, so I was quite happy with that SpongeBob meme. I did it a month ago. I was like, yeah, I want to publish it. But I wanted to do it at the same time when around Europe Day and the interview with the European movement. But well, I wish you all a good evening, and I will see you all tomorrow, hopefully, or at another point. Have a good one, guys. Bye bye.